Mohsin, welcome to the
Hello.
show.
Hi.
I'm excited. We're going to speak about one of my favorite topics today, about games and facilitation, and facilitating games and facilitating learning through games.
One of my favorites as well. So we're on the same page there.
What a nice coincidence. And there's always the same warm-up question. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator? And actually, do you?
I do, actually. That's one of the titles that I attribute myself to. And for me, it was quite an interesting journey. It started out being a trainer. I think I started almost a decade ago, prior to facilitator being a commonly used word for folks who do facilitate. But I think there's also been a transition that I've gone through, where initially I was, in fact, a trainer because I used to train on soft skills. And that transitioned and transformed into taking on the role of more of a facilitator, because that's something that I resonated with. It appealed to me deeply. Also because as a facilitator, I'm no longer training and I'm no longer imparting my wisdom. I'm you know what I mean, right?
Yes.
I'm not center stage anymore. I'm enabling, I'm empowering, I'm co-creating with my participants. So I guess that transition happened about 7 years ago for me.
Interesting. And I would be curious, what in particular, maybe one example, that has changed in your practice between being a trainer and becoming a facilitator, from transferring your knowledge from your brain to their brain towards enabling them to bridge the knowledge gap themselves, maybe?
Yeah, I think it's even today true that a very, very simple and core belief that I don't have all the answers. And that's okay.
Yeah, the facilitator's mindset. And do you think it has also to do with how we set the stage? So I think if you're inviting a group to a training, then they have expectations of receiving knowledge. Whereas I can imagine, I'm thinking out loud, if we're inviting them to a workshop, it sounds that they have to work for the knowledge. So it's more of an active than a passive role.
Yeah, I agree. I would have to second that. So when participants are invited in order to participate in a facilitated ecosystem versus in a training, there's a different kind of commitment and attitude that the participants bring to the table. And I think we sometimes have to go beyond just terming it facilitator. We may have to specify what is expected of the participants as well, because not everybody understands and resonates with the term facilitator or facilitated ecosystems. And not everybody gets it. I mean, an average director of a company or the average VP of an organization may not necessarily know the nuances of what a facilitator is there to do. But if they're told that this is going to be your role, where you'll be actively participating in co-creating something, then that's the expectation that they walk in through the door with.
I love that. And so you're starting or you're priming the group on the belief that they are about to learn from each other as much as you bring in terms of maybe methods or insights.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And nowadays you're using games to facilitate learning or to facilitate training.
Yeah.
What do you understand by game? Just to make sure that we are speaking about the same thing.
So a game is a closed and controlled environment in which there are players, there are rules, and there is something that the players are playing with, a toy, if you will, just to simplify it. And these three elements create the ecosystem of a game.
Is there necessarily always a goal and a winner?
Yes and no.
What if it was easy for once?
Right. Yes, because not all games. Yes, because all games require a goal for people to try to achieve. Whether you're playing a collaborative game or whether you're playing a competitive game, there has to be some sort of an end goal that you're going after. This is true for finite games, but then there are infinite games as well. And that's what I meant when I said, no, that not all games have to have a goal, because in an infinite game, you're hoping to play just to play, to keep the game going.
Love the book, Finite and Infinite Games by
James Harden.
I don't mean Simon Sinek, but
James
the original.
Harden, I think.
Yes. The only goal of an infinite game is to keep on playing, and it's actually more a mindset.
Yeah.
Of playing an infinite game.
Yeah.
So what got you into using games as a tool or a method to train? Were you first into games and then into training, or first into training and then you use games?
Well, I've always been into games. Ever since I was a kid, I played a lot of games and loved the fantastic reality that games would create. And I've had my own journey with different kinds of games, because when you think of games, a lot of times we think of a singular type of game, whether, and that's often attributed to our own experience of games. So if you have had an experience of seeing or associating a game with something like Mario, then that's what's in your mind when somebody talks about a game. Versus when, if your experience has been Tetris, then that's what you're thinking when somebody else is talking about a game. Versus if your experience of a game is a card playing game, whether it's playing cards or a deck-based game, then that's what you're thinking. So I've had my own journey with different types of games, even in the video game genre alone. I think my first few games were, of course, Mario and Tetris, and that's where it started for me. And then it moved into skateboarding games. And I played a lot of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I don't know, all of them probably for as long as I could when I was a kid. And then moved into more of role-playing games. And that was a really interesting transition as well, because now it's no longer just, mashing buttons, playing, fighting and doing a 2D battle against my friends. Now I was really an active member of the game ecosystem. The game was built around me. So I was the hero. I was the protagonist. And I was navigating through various worlds and acquiring items and unlocking levels and defeating monsters and collaborating with other AI elements within the game world. So that was a journey in itself. And then I moved into board games, and that opened up another whole realm of games for me. So I guess I've always been into games, but what's changed over the way in which I've integrated that into my life and my work has been through the power of bringing game elements into what I did, whether it was when I was a trainer or whether it was when I was a facilitator as well. And even today, when I deliver learning experiences, they're centered around a game ecosystem.
Mm. Thank you for bringing all that up and putting it into context. And before going deeper in how you're using games for the learning context and to create the ecosystem, you made me realize that maybe every human being on Earth has a very personal relationship with games. So depending on your past experience, exactly what you explained, when you say games, do I think Super Mario? Do I think Tetris? Do I think board games? Do I think, or do I remember the times where I, as a kid, was sitting under the table screaming because I was losing again? Or do I remember the times where we had this kind of cozy family time with a sense of belonging and loving? And I wonder, is it something that you have to take into consideration, that when you're inviting a diverse group of individuals around a virtual or physical table to play a game, that first you have to normalize what it means to play a game?
Yeah, spot on. What it means to play a game and what it means to play this game, the one we are about to play. And a lot of times I get this question of, older folks will not play a game, or, men play more games than women do, and that's not true, actually. Or any of those, stereotypes. But my belief is that it's not so much about whether some people play games and others don't. I think the question really is, what kind of games do people play? And I'm not talking about transactional analysis of what, the games people play. I'm talking about just the idea of games or play.
So collaboration versus competition, that's something that you mentioned earlier. The nature of the game and the role of the individual strategy. Maybe what is the winning strategy? Is this what you're referring to?
That could be one example. There could be others as well. So are you into a casual game? Are you into a strategic game? Are you into something that's role-playing? Are you into something that is action? Are you into first-person shooter? So there are many different types of games. And I think we really ought to see games as another media, just like books or TV or radio. There are different types of media, and every media has many genres in it and has the power to teach, to educate, to entertain, and to distribute information. So similarly, games have the ability to do all of that because they're just another media. The difference between a game as a media and any other print or visual media is that games allow the player to be an active member in that media.
And it basically normalizes the situation by definition, because you're creating this new ecosystem.
Yeah.
And you would then take the time to get the participant there, because I wonder to what extent culture or ethics also play a role in how we show up to a game. So, for instance, in some cultures, it might be more the competitive nature of a game might be more natural. So the mindset with which I'm entering a game will be totally different as when I'm part of a society where it's more collaborative or maybe more creative. So how do you, or maybe it doesn't play a role when you onboard participants on this learning journey through games?
It does. It does. I'd have to 100% agree with what you're saying, because I've had the privilege of facilitating Evive, the game that I have built, one of the games that I've built, across many geographies with people of different backgrounds, different walks of life, and different age groups. And I've seen that in cultures and regions where competition is a very core part of who the people are. And that could be due to a number of reasons. One of them could be population. If there's a lot of population in a region or in a country, then job opportunities are scarce. And because of that, people need to be more competitive in order to get that, whether it's for a job or whether it's for a placement in a college, a prestigious college, or whether it's in any degree, any part of your life. And that versus another ecosystem where competition is not a core part of how people live their lives. And when I've seen people play Evive, there's a greater and more natural affinity to collaborate in the regions where there isn't competition by default, versus in other regions where competition is inherent, slightly more inherent, or a greater affinity.
And what you're just sharing kind of evokes in me that there is, so depending on who the audience is, who the players are, and the strategies or the ways of playing the game they choose, there's so many different levels to reflect on a game and to learn from it. So to debrief, which then makes me think and ask, are all games created equal? So what makes a good game to facilitate learning? Because that's the topic of our conversation today in the core of your work.
What makes a good game to facilitate? Wow, I've really got to think about this for a minute.
To facilitate learning.
To facilitate learning, yeah. I would say it would depend on what we are trying to facilitate, because not all games can facilitate everything. So it would start with, does the game bring up the elements that we are trying to facilitate? So I'll give you an example. If we are attempting to facilitate for a group of people or a group of leaders who are not aligned to one another, they're kind of doing their own thing. We need cohesion in the team. We need people to account for what other members of the team are doing before they take an action. We need the game to simulate and provide such opportunities to the players in the game ecosystem. Because ultimately, your goal when you're trying to facilitate using games is to create the reality that the players are facing in real life in the game ecosystem, so that they can look at that in that container ecosystem, take a step back, zoom out, look at what they've done, and evaluate if what they did was productive or counterproductive.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, understand correctly, it must be from the context similar, or from the rules, or to reflect the behavior, but still sufficiently abstract or different to trigger maybe the unconscious behavior.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's what is the real tricky part of all of this, is for it to be far removed from their present reality, that it has to be abstract enough for them to not just be able to compare apples to apples. This is what I did in real life, and this is what I'm doing in the game ecosystem, because the actions are identical and the outcome is identical. But when we create an abstract enough, a fantasy ecosystem environment, we are now comparing apples to apples at a behavior level, but apples and oranges at an outcome level in the game environment.
Have you noticed, or would it then happen that someone would say, yes, but this is just a game? It doesn't. I think what we try to remove through a game is the finger pointing. So we increase the level of abstraction and can then look at the behavior of a team or a group in the game and then discuss, okay, does this also happen in real life? Air quotes. And what does it mean? To what extent do you have then defense mechanisms of someone saying, yeah, but this was just a game, and in real life I'm totally different, I'm never that competitive in real life. In real life I don't cheat.
Yeah.
And how do you deal with that?
Yeah, so it's happened to me, because when you facilitate as many games as I have, then this is bound to happen, right? And what I've come to realize is that it is all about creating psychological safety for the participants. That if they feel that this is a space for them to learn, a space for them to experiment, a space for them to gain insight about themselves, about what's working, about what's not working, so on and so forth, then they are likely to adopt the concept, the idea, the approach. If they feel otherwise, they will denounce it. And in some cases, they may even challenge the facilitator. And there are ways to work around that. For example, one of the things that I talk about quite a bit when facilitating games is the importance of the facilitator equipping the players with everything they need in order to play the game. I used to be, at one point in my life, of the opinion that people must suffer and that they must go through the rigor of defeat in order to gain anything meaningful out of the game. And no. But that's not true anymore for me. I don't view it that way any longer. And it took.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, and it took one specific event for me to change my mind about that. And the event was something to the effect of, I facilitated the game, didn't provide as much support to the players as they were playing, and the team that was playing the game turned on me. They believed that I had rigged the game for them to lose, because they played 3 times, they lost all 3 times, and that pretty much took away the learning that could have been in that ecosystem, because they were of the opinion that no matter how hard we try to play and win this game, we will not win because you set us up to lose. This game is unwinnable. And that can can be detrimental. It can be disastrous for a facilitated ecosystem.
How did you react in this situation? I mean, that's kind of a facilitator's nightmare.
Yes, it really is. It was my nightmare for sure. For me, that day, I pretty much had to bring every ounce of facilitation I had in me to bring the team together. And I really dealt with the core issue at hand, which was, do you believe this is a winnable game? And then convince them and show them all the ways in which this was a winnable game.
And it's such an interesting case. Thank you for bringing them up, because it, on the one hand, I can imagine that it might even be beneficial for the team because it brings the team closer together. They have a common enemy, air quotes, who's you in this case. So, and then for the facilitator, this challenge of modeling behavior that we would consider important for teams, like admitting shortcomings, mistakes, how to communicate, how to be open for feedback, how to listen. And if something that it's your game, so it's something deeply personal. So for me, I can only imagine the challenge of not becoming defensive and using it to model kind of behavior and leadership and how to deal with setbacks and challenges on a meta level. Wow.
Yeah, that was a challenging one.
Yeah.
Sure.
What makes a workshop fail, in your opinion?
A game-based learning workshop?
Yes.
I would say one is this bit that we've just now talked about, which is people believing that the system is rigged in some way for them to fail every time so that they can draw some learning from it.
Mm.
So I think it's disbelief in the method is one. And that I think this point can be applied across the board, whether it's the method of how you're facilitating, whether it's the method of a game, or whether it's a framework, it could be anything. But if your participants have a disbelief in that method, then it's likely to fail.
Yeah, like that. Yeah, which is, again, it's related to trust and hence also to psychological safety, what you meant beforehand.
Yeah.
And I find it interesting. Maybe we can circle back to what you said earlier about the degree of difficulty of a game. So if it's too difficult and you don't give sufficient guidance to the team, they will feel frustrated up to a point where it becomes a failure, as you say, because they will become ignorant to the learning because it's all about distrust into the system. On the other hand, if it's too easy, then it's boring or it's not fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how do you choose the level of difficulty? Is there a way, is it a trial and error? Does it depend on the group?
No, I think this, of course, it depends on the group. It depends on the people's ability to play and people's ability to engage as well and understand, comprehend the game environment. But it's also the game's responsibility. I think what you're talking about is the proverbial challenge of engagement. If it's too easy, I will disengage. If it's too hard, I will disengage. So it's like there's a path, there's a narrow and straight path in the middle with valleys on both ends, right, on both sides. And so you've got to identify what will it take for you to keep your players on that path. Now, the tricky thing about this is that it can't just be one setting from the beginning to the end. And I think games do this quite naturally via an element called progression and leveling up. So as you level up in the game becomes progressively harder. But as you're leveling up, you're also skilling up. So you're becoming more and more skilled in how to play the game. So you're becoming more adept in your ability to play the game. And now you're able to deal with greater challenges than you did before because you're more skilled. So the game is matching your skill level every time. And some games do this really beautifully, where they will create some elements in which you will progressively fail, only to realize that you need to be at a higher level in order to defeat that boss or to overcome that one mission or that one challenge. And that's a very relevant and critical part of what games do in order to engage. Scaffolding is another great example of how games bring new players up to speed.
Can you give an example? What do you mean by scaffolding?
So support ecosystems created by the game to teach you how to play, and where the game itself helps you learn the core mechanics of the game. How do you earn the currency? How do you unlock weapons? Or how do you navigate? How do you move from point A to point B? Most games, if you ever download a video game, or even if you download, for example, I'll give you a great example. I just recently purchased a board game called Wingspan. It's a beautiful game. If you've never played it, give it a go. In Wingspan, you are responsible for a bird sanctuary, and you are to bring wild birds and different kinds of birds, and you have to breed them in your bird sanctuary. To do that, you need to attract the right bird with the right kind of food, and you've got to create the habitat for the bird to lay eggs, do all of that kind of stuff, right? Now, while this game is quite complex because it has many actions and there could be a lot of different things you could do, what the creators of the game did was they packed a very separate rule book with very separate bird cards and very separate ecosystem with player mats just for first-time play. And they marked it very clearly, indicating that if you're playing this game for the first time, use only this. And now they've taken away all of the additional mechanics from that ecosystem, and they've given me just what I really need to know, and with guided support, turn by turn, on exactly what I need to do in order to learn and get up to speed and start playing quickly.
This is so smart, because I was just thinking of board games that I've started, and I'm not a huge board game. I'm not coming from a board game family. I think this, right? The two kinds of people. And I realized that I lost the habit to really read the instructions and go through it and learn it step by step, because how we learn nowadays is through digital interactive media. So I click somewhere, it doesn't work. I click somewhere else, and thereby I learn very fast. To sit down to read instructions and then not getting the immediate feedback loop that what I've done is actually wrong and doesn't work out, can lead to frustration very quickly. So to have a mini game to just get used to the mechanics of the game, and maybe to get some very first dopamine highs of, yeah, it worked out.
Yeah.
Small success.
Small successes. It's also about attention span. You
Yes.
know, to watch even a video. Some of these board games have 30-minute and 60-minute long videos that just teach you how to play. Yeah.
People don't even watch my 1-minute videos until the end.
Yeah. And some of these have that level of work that you have to do in order to just learn how to play the game.
Yeah.
And once you learn it, then you come back and play it. So this was such a smart scaffolding mechanism that they had built. And I haven't seen this in a lot of games. I've played a lot of board games and I have not seen this in a lot of games, but they have it in this one. And it was beautiful to see, and it was beautiful to experience, because I was able to just read what I'm supposed to do in the turn, do my turn, move to the next one. Somebody else takes their turn. They're following their instructions. I'm learning by watching them. They're learning by watching my move. And within 5 or 7 moves, we're now able to understand how the flow of events work in the game ecosystem. So that's an example of scaffolding.
Very interesting. Thank you for bringing that up. And I just, random thought, I just wonder how many different versions of a board game exist by people who just understand the instructions in a different way and then create their own games and play their own rules, which is maybe just good enough.
Yeah.
I can imagine that there are a million variations of every board game in the world.
For sure, sure, because the instructions can be read differently. I mean, I've played with a number of friends who've played a certain game differently, wrong or right. I can't comment on that, but they've played it differently than I have. So that happens.
Yeah, that's what I love about backgammon. Depending on which region of the world you're going to, backgammon is always played slightly differently.
Yeah.
And every culture believes that their way of playing backgammon is the best one. I would like to come back to one thing that you spoke about: engagement with a game of too little or too much engagement. And I was wondering about the tension that you want to create with a learning game between engaging with the game itself as opposed to engaging with the participants around the game. Because, and maybe I need some clarification from your end, how you're using the game, whether it's rather an individual learning journey. So yes, we are playing with a group, but it's actually about my learning about myself. Or is it a group experience where I'm actually learning together with the others? And then I can imagine that the game really has to hold the balance between not hijacking all the engagement. Does it make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. I think specifically speaking in the context of games for learning, and I'm gonna qualify that a little bit further by saying games, multiplayer games for learning, because there are different genres of games, and then within that, you can either play it individually or in a multiplayer ecosystem. I build a lot more multiplayer ecosystems of games. And I think the fine balance is to create games which allow for players to interact with each other and allow for a lot of the things that happen in real life in the game ecosystem. So exchange of resources, generating of resources, working towards a common goal, the goal being ambiguous in some cases, because these are the challenges that we deal with. And my effort in when I create multiplayer game ecosystems is to mirror what happens in real work life environments. Sometimes we have competing priorities. There's an individual objective, and then there's a group objective. Sometimes we prioritize individual objective over group objectives. Sometimes we have to let go of individual objectives in order to achieve a group goal. And a game that creates that is powerful. A game that has the potential of that playing out can be really, really meaningful.
And I wonder, my brain is just firing ideas and questions as you're speaking, because it makes me think of the complexity that, as you say, sometimes it's about the individual, sometimes it's about the group. And sometimes it's not clear what is to be preferred in. It can depend on the company culture, it can depend on the industry, it can depend on a very specific case and project. So when you're using a game to learn, I can imagine that it's not about one solution dominating the other or being better than the other, but seeing the consequences and understanding the consequences.
Yeah, and that's really what games are all about. And this is something that I've believed at the very core of my understanding of what games can do for learning or for change to take place, because they give you an opportunity to look at the consequence of your decision.
Yes, and then it must be sufficiently flexible as a game in order not to implicitly favor one outcome over the other.
Yeah.
And I just wonder, well, I think even Monopoly, you could play in a way that there is maybe a group goal. Maybe.
Could be.
Yeah, the extreme. What does it take then to, or let me ask it more provocatively. So once you design the game, put it out there, does it actually need a facilitator? Or does a game facilitate itself?
For a game to invoke learning in a multiplayer ecosystem, a facilitator is necessary. This has been my experience. I have been toying with the idea of artificial intelligence with games and what AI can do to become an active facilitator of learning for groups or individuals, but we're not there yet.
What is missing?
The intelligence part of artificial intelligence.
Why am I not surprised? And what do you mean by that?
I think as facilitators, we bring a certain amount of nuanced capability, presence, and resonance to a team. A good facilitator does that. A good facilitator is able to recognize what is happening within the team, read between the lines, and understand things that technology just won't see. So much of, human dynamics plays out beyond the tangible data sets and data points. And a facilitator is able to pick that up and bring it to the participants to look at in order to reflect, enable reflection, and ultimately facilitate learning.
So it's all in speaking out what it's not said, making the maybe unconscious conscious or the implicit explicit. And one example that immediately crossed my mind was interpreting the sounds of silence. That I think until AI or machine is able to tell what kind of silence is in the room, is it a reflective silence or passive aggressive silence or an upset silence or awkward silence?
Yeah.
It will take a while.
It will, because we need technology to be emotionally intelligent and understand human dynamics to be able to really replace the role of a facilitator. So to come back to the question. So to come back to the question, do games need to be facilitated in order to draw learning in multiplayer ecosystems? Yes.
I would have been surprised about any other answer. And I think that it's a nice way to reflect on the role of a facilitator and what it takes to be a good facilitator. Because it's basically all these nuances that cannot be replaced by a machine. What's your personal number one challenge in facilitating games?
My core challenge when facilitating games for learning is to be able to provide sufficient support to the group without giving too much. And that is different for different teams and different groups of people from different parts of the world at different age groups. So I have to be present enough to be able to understand how quick is this team going to get it, and based on that, moderate even how fast or slow I speak when facilitating the experience. So my challenge starts with teaching the game well, and then ensuring that it lands for the participants at the end. Because if we don't facilitate an effective reflection and debrief, then it was just another game experience, just another thing they did.
Can you give an example when it maybe went wrong or when it worked out, or to highlight these nuances? Because I do have something made up in my mind and would like to ask instead of assume.
Sure. So you could play a game, and I've done it in both contexts, actually. I've used my games for pure entertainment value, just to have fun. And I've also used the same game to teach some of the most nuanced behaviors, or to talk about, at least open up the opportunity to reflect on. And I'll give two very extreme examples just so you kind of get it. And I'm speaking about Evive in this context. So in one case, this client wanted just a fun activity. They didn't want any learning. They just wanted something fun that people would play and would collaborate or do something, and just kind of, and they really just needed it as a game. Sure, why not? And because I'm always looking for different and unique ways of using the game and what it can do. For me, it expands my understanding of games for learning. It expands my understanding of human behavior, human dynamics, and it's a learning opportunity for me in every case. So we did that, and it was a success because it achieved the objective of the client. People had fun, they played, and they won. Great. And there was learning probably at personal level. Whatever people can take and will take, those of us who are reflective in nature will learn from anything and everything. Those of us who are not won't learn. It's just the reality.
No matter what. Good one, yes.
Right? On the other hand, I've used the game to facilitate a play experience. And then after the play, I've engaged in one-on-one conversations with the participants who played the game. I, as a facilitator, noted down a number of critical insights about every player and their key decision-making choices along the way. And there are also their opportunities that they either took or missed, and compared that to how the group played the game. And that enabled me to have coaching conversations with every participant. And I remember engaging in one such conversation wherein I asked the person about if some of the things that they did in the game, specific activities such as not taking up enough space in the room, although they had some brilliant ideas. And I asked them if they did this in other parts of their lives as well. And their response was, this happens to me every day.
Were they conscious about it?
They became conscious after this conversation. And then we went deeper. We talked about, let's look at the game experience to hopefully draw some more insight from this and talk about, why didn't you do this? What prevented you from sharing your ideas in the game ecosystem? And they said, well, others were talking, there wasn't enough space. And so I felt like even though I want to say something, it wouldn't be heard.
Da, 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 da.
You're seeing this, right? So there is a direct correlation between how they played the game in the gaming system and how they deal with similar things or situations in real life. And so for them to be able to share their ideas, they need kind of an open space. They need the environment to not be chaotic and for people to not be talking all the time. But they can't control that. So sometimes either you change the way you respond to the situation, or other times you ask for what you need. But one way or the other, there was an insight there. Two extreme examples.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And it just highlights the missed opportunity for the team that just wanted to have fun and to win. If you see what can become possible, if you're just allowing it. Because then the conversation, bringing it back to the team and just putting it on the table. Okay, these are all the missed opportunities because someone in the team doesn't find the space to speak up. Another one feels judged or overlooked or whatsoever. Then the real transformation can actually happen.
Yeah.
Which brings us back, because that's a prerequisite, only if the individuals and the team as separate entity feel safe enough to do that and to go there.
Yeah.
Do you think that every game creates this? Is it easier for a game to create a sense of safety Oh, and what is it?
I don't think a game has the power to create the sense of safety. It is the participants, including the facilitator, who hold the power to create a sense of safety. Because I've been a part of game ecosystems where people didn't feel safe. And I've been part of non-game ecosystems where people felt very safe. So it's about the pretext. It's about setting that environment up to be what you'd like it to be in order for it to reap the benefits of psychological safety.
And can you put your finger on what made the difference between the two extreme situations you just pointed out? I find this fascinating.
The difference in...
So the ecosystems where it didn't feel safe for the player and others where it did feel extremely safe. What made the difference?
That the people believe that they can trust each other and that they wouldn't be punished for a mistake. And I think more importantly, people felt free. And feeling free is so important.
Mm.
And this is, I think this goes back to the very fundamental core element of what makes play work, which is you cannot force play.
Mm.
If you try to force play, it will not happen. I mean, can you imagine? We've all been in this situation, right? We've had best friends as kids, and sometimes you want to force your best friend to play with you. They don't want to play. You cannot force them to play. Play, play only
You invite in.
Yeah. Play only takes place when you feel free.
When you feel free to join or not to join.
Yeah.
Mm. Good one. Thank you. And then I wonder so the benefit, but also the challenge of online games is that you can hide your identity. So, and I recorded a while back already a conversation with someone who would use a virtual reality environment for workshops so that participants could basically hide behind an avatar. And she shared that it was increasing a sense of safety and improving openness to share maybe also personal things or just to experiment with new behaviors and new personality traits. And at the same time, I'm thinking of Twitter, where and some trolls that just appear in virtual environment, online environments that behave in such a nasty way that it does actually put the safety at risk. So what's your experience with hosting groups of individuals who sign up? Is it safer or less safe online through the option to hide identity?
I think technology is just that. It's a tool, right? Ultimately, it's on us in terms of how we use it. So one of the things that I've been doing over the last 2 years, almost the only thing that I've done consistently, is to host a game of Evive on an almost weekly basis, where I invite my network, LinkedIn or otherwise, to come together and play. And people don't know each other. So usually these groups are people that can be from any part of the world, and usually serves as a melting pot of people meeting for the first time, networking together, and then ultimately playing Evive, and coming out of that, drawing some learning from the experience. My biggest insight from these hundreds of games that I've ran over these 2 years is perhaps that when people come together and they don't know each other, they are likely to be more of themselves than they are otherwise. In other words, they're likely to be feeling more free than they would otherwise, versus teams of people that know each other, play the game, often carry the baggage of what's outside the game into the game ecosystem. And that also serves as critical insight for the facilitator to look at and consider what may be some dysfunctions within a team.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting because then it's something to play with and to use for the debrief. It reminds me of these one-shot games or traveling in holidays. If you, as a solo traveler, I loved meeting random people in holidays because you can just be fully yourself. You most likely never meet them again anyway.
There you go.
Yeah, some of the most fun evenings.
Yeah, you've got nothing to lose.
Yeah,
you don't have you don't have a mask on. You don't have a facade, because you don't care even if they judge you.
Yeah,
right? Because you might never meet them again. You might choose to. They might send you a LinkedIn request, but you might choose to not accept it.
Yeah, yeah. So you've shared about your game, and now, so I have not played it yet because I enjoy to have the same level of air quotes ignorance on not knowledge as the audience, so that we don't have an expert conversation. And I'm curious, so what's the game about? And after 2 years of playing with groups, what have you learned?
So what is the game about? Perhaps I'll tell the story of how I came to design this game. And it started with one of my clients about 7 years ago asking me to run an activity or something that would get these group of project managers to finally work together, and to work together in the way that opportunities are scarce. And so when a project manager takes an opportunity from the marketplace and they don't live up to fulfilling that opportunity, it's a loss of revenue for the entire organization. And in doing that, they're also depriving the rest of the organization from gaining such opportunities. But ultimately, when they do achieve the goal of that opportunity, everybody wins.
Mm-hmm.
And this is often the case with very large project management run organizations. And so I had to design a game ecosystem that would simulate that kind of an environment. And so I built Evive with the intention of creating such a mechanism. And after deploying that game at the start of that year, it was a huge success with this client. But that gave me the idea of being able to use it with other clients, because certainly others were also facing similar challenges. And then as I got to use the game more and more, I realized that it had more uses beyond project management and beyond collaboration and cohesion. And of course, constantly going back and forth with the game design and the need of the world kept adding additional nuanced elements within the game that would make it more and more applicable. And it wasn't until about 2 years ago that I realized that I've been selfishly using this tool for so many years. And now it was time for me to invite other facilitators to also be able to use the game. So that's the story of the.
Nice. And what is the key insight from playing the same game over and over again with always different groups?
I think the biggest insight is that no two games have ever been identical. Because the game unfolds based on the players who play it. So the moment you replace even one member of the team, you can expect a slightly different version of the outcome in the game. And that every single person brings in or takes something away from the game experience.
And what does it mean in terms of facilitation capabilities? So what makes a good facilitator of a game then? Because it sounds like you have to be, and you mentioned a few of those when we talked about AI, about the presence and being able to understand silence. And I still hear some other nuances like connecting dots or understanding group dynamics very quickly? Or to what extent would you rather stand back and then lead with questions in such an environment? So how do you understand your role?
I think your role as a facilitator is directly linked to your objective as a facilitator. And I think this is true across the board. Whether you're facilitating a game or you're facilitating a meeting or whether you're facilitating a company offsite, so it's really about what you were contracted as a facilitator to do in that event or in that situation. And if my job as the facilitator is to create reflection and then debrief on specific points, then I would be looking out for those instances as the game is unfolding, and almost always start with questions. So my biggest question at the end of a game is what happened? Because there's so much happening, right, in the game. And my biggest question, first question, 99% of times is what happened? And I mean, because they've just had this high octane sort of experience with so much energy that they're just ready to roll it. They're ready to talk about everything that's happened. And I like to qualify that by saying, okay, so every single person in the room has had their own journey. What's your journey like? And then we go around the room and people share their perspectives around what their journey was. And each person has a different journey. Somebody was fully engaged. Somebody was lost and confused. Another person was never even heard. They tried to be heard the whole time, and then they disengaged because nobody listened to them.
Thank you for walking me and us through. Because I think the magic, and that's where I think that's where the high art of facilitation comes in, right? You can ask, how was that? And have everyone blabbering. Or you can ask, so what has happened? And acknowledging that everyone had their own journey, and therefore letting everyone speak about their own journey and having everyone listen to each one's journey without, because there you really make space, you hold the space for everyone to share, but also to learn and maybe then to self-reflect, because it can imagine that it's quite emotional when I was super engaged and I played my game and maybe I won. So I have this high energy, and then I hear from someone that they felt lost and not heard. Ooh, how am I dealing with that?
Yeah. I'll give you a really cool example of something we did. So this client had a challenge of attrition of new employees.
Mm-hmm.
So new employees that were coming on board. This was a startup which had grown quite a bit in a very short span of time. And any of the new people that they were onboarding were leaving the organization within 3 months. Yeah, very large number. And so that was a problem. And HR knew it, some of the leaders knew it, but the teams didn't know what to do or what they were doing to facilitate some of this. And so we decided to play this game. And about 15 minutes into the game, we taught the game, we started the game, we deployed the game, and about 15 minutes of gameplay, we added 5 new members into the game.
Mm-hmm.
These would represent the new employees.
Mm-hmm.
And we told the team that new members will join you, so when they do, it's your responsibility to catch them up, to bring them up to speed on what to do.
Genius. Okay. Yeah.
on how to play and how things will unfold. So, and remember, this is a team game. You guys are working together, right? By the end of the game, those 5 people went from being assets to the team to being liabilities because they were under-equipped, frustrated because they didn't know what to do, how to play the game, and they were ignored the whole time because the rest of the teams were too busy playing the game. And then we asked the question, does this look familiar? First, we created the space for everybody to talk about what happened for them. And when they said, so people have, polarizing opinions about what happened. One person says, I had the time of my life. I had the greatest experience today. Felt like I was super engaged. Another person says, I was completely disengaged to the point that I almost left this meeting. Polar views. And then we said, do you see what you're seeing here? Is any of this making sense?
That's genius, the setup. Thank you for sharing that. Did they see it? Were they able to change something?
They did. Yeah. They realized that they don't create enough space for people to come into the ecosystem. And sometimes they're too busy just doing operational things on a day-to-day basis that they don't have the time to help new people really learn the ropes of how to be in business with them.
Wow. And what a challenge then to change behavior sustainably, because it's one thing to realize what's going wrong and to know that there is a lot of work to be done.
Yeah.
And then to do the work and to transfer the learnings from the game into the everyday operations of a team.
Yeah, exactly. And that's part of the problem, I think. I think when it comes to really creating sustainable change, a big part of the problem is the belief that there is a problem.
Mm.
it's not enough for just a couple of people to know and see what the problem is. It's important that everybody who is going to be a change agent to know and recognize that there is a problem and this is what it looks like before we put our heads together and come up with a solution. Often, the leaders understand and have a sense of what the problem is. They come up with the solution and expect everybody else to get on board. That's what the job of the facilitator comes in, right?
Yeah. And that reminds me of, I had a conversation with Janek Palek, also about games and facilitation. And he called them the alpha players, kind of someone who read all the instructions and who knows everything, and then turns into this micromanager player in board games. So, okay, so you're going to do this, and then you do that, and then, oh no, you're doing it wrong. So they start to manage, and then they wonder why people are not coming back from the bio break or stay in the kitchen.
Exactly. Or why people are on their phones.
Yes. So I can imagine these are then the leadership teams, right? That wonder why nobody buys into their fantastic strategy. But they're doing such a great job to explain it to everyone how they're supposed to behave.
Yeah.
Mm. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Is there anything that you would have wanted to share, but we didn't have time for just yet?
I don't know. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah. Thank you. And I'll put in the show notes how to find you and how to find your game and how to sign up, either to join as an experience or to play it with their team.
Sure.
Awesome. Thank you, Mohsin.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Dum, da, da, dum. That's the end of the podcast jingle.